Welcome to Catholic Feedback. I'm your host, Keith Nestor. On this podcast, we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith with everyday life. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Down to Earth Ministry, a ministry of stewardship, a mission of faith, and by the generous support of our patrons. For more information, please visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. Let's get to it. Hey friends, welcome to Catholic Feedback, the podcast where we connect the eternal truths of the Catholic faith to everyday life. In today's episode, this is an incredible opportunity that we're going to have to speak to a man who has taken the truths of the Catholic faith and not just applied it to his everyday life, but to the everyday lives of over 2 million kids every single day. That's right, 2 million. And what we're going to talk about today is how our Catholic faith inspires us to care for people in ways that can go beyond anything we can possibly imagine. I've often said that when you come into the Catholic faith, you are signing up for the adventure of a lifetime. And my guest today has truly experienced this incredible adventure. His name is Magnus MacFarlane-Barrow. He's from Scotland, and he runs a ministry called Mary's Meals. You may have heard of Mary's Meals. They are all over the place. I've seen Magnus interviewed on lots of news outlets, and I think he even gave a TED Talk once. And he's here with me today coming from Scotland to talk to us on Catholic Feedback about this incredible ministry and also how his Catholic faith is really the motivator behind what he's doing. It's not enough just to do things for the world in a nice way. When we are doing things as a ministry, we are meeting needs with the love of Christ. And Magnus has an incredible story to tell with Mary's Meals. So I'd like to invite him in. Magnus, thank you so much for joining me here on Catholic Feedback.
Thank you, Keith. I'm really delighted to be invited in. So thank you so much.
It's awesome. So tell everybody where you are right now.
So I'm in the Highlands of Scotland, a little village called Dalmally, where I live, sitting in a shed that I borrowed off my dad about 30 years ago and never given it back. It's become my office and the headquarters of this work of ours. So here I am.
I love that story that you began Mary's Meals in the shed and that you're still there. I think a lot of people, all these years later would have maybe upgraded to a big fancy office with something. But the fact that you have remained in that simple, humble place is just powerful. So tell us first, before you tell us about Mary's Meals, tell us about you, because I think one will lead to the other. But I'm curious about you and your faith journey. And for our listeners who don't know you or don't know about you, give us the scoop.
Well, I grew up here in this same village, spent most of my childhood here. My parents ran a guest house. It's a beautiful area of the country. Many people come here. And when we were young, when I was only 15 years of age, we went on a family pilgrimage to Medjugorje, that place in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where there have been reports that the Virgin Mary has been appearing for many years now. And the experience that we had there, it really, I suppose, renewed our Catholic faith. We were already, I suppose you could say, a devout Catholic family, but our experience there really led us to try and live our faith in a new way. It led my parents to decide to give up their guest house and to turn our home instead into a Catholic retreat centre. Really, they just opened the doors of our home and invited anyone who wanted to come and spend time in prayer to do that. And that's what's been going on there ever since. People from all over the world come on retreat here. So I suppose I had an unusual upbringing, and a very blessed upbringing in hindsight, in all sorts of ways, especially in having parents of very, very deep faith, people who made really, I would say, quite radical choices in terms of living charity in their lives. And I probably didn't realize it at the time. In fact, I had some discomfort at the time with some of that, but I think it had a very profound effect on me and the choices I made later in my own life.
That's incredible. I went on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje myself. I've been there twice, but the first time I went, I was a Protestant youth pastor, and it's pretty not excited about the Catholic faith, but kind of learning. Like I was brought there by some friends who were trying to help me to learn more about it. And I thought, well, I'll go and check this out, but I'm not doing any of this Mary stuff, you know. And you know, all these years later coming into the church, you know, I remember that experience being not sure what to make of it, but it left a profound effect on me. And then I went back a year after I had come into the church, and then it was a whole different world, you know. And I just, when I heard that was part of your story, I felt that was just, I'm not surprised by that. That was really incredible. So you grew up Catholic, you grew up going to church, you grew up in the faith, but what was it that made you have this heart for wanting to feed children? And tell us about where the inspiration for Mary's Meals came from.
Well, maybe, you know, first of all, to be truthful, it was never a grand plan of mine. It never felt like any big dramatic decision, really. I always feel very grateful to God that he kind of, I don't know, just revealed this one little bit at a time, or asked me just to do one more thing. I think if he had asked me for something more frightening, I probably would have run away. I was very, very shy, lacking in confidence as a young man. So I would have laughed then if someone would have said God would have me traveling around the world, giving talks and doing things like this. So really what happened was I was a salmon farmer after I left school, living in a very remote place, feeding fish, basically. That at that time, that was the early 90s, the terrible war had begun in the former Yugoslavia. And probably because of our history with Medjugorje, we felt especially moved. And my brother and I decided, actually, over a pint of beer, if I'm really honest, Keith, one evening, why don't we try and do something to help these people who are suffering? And we just launched a little appeal, asked people we knew to give us food and clothing, and we got in an old truck and we drive this 3 days over to the other side of Europe to deliver these gifts to people who are suffering in the refugee camps. And I came home thinking, really, I've done my good deed. It'll be back to work on the fish farm. And then I discovered God had a very different plan, because when I got back here to this shed, I found it was full to the roof with donations of clothes and so on. And so I prayed about it, and I decided to give up my job, which was no huge sacrifice, really. And I sold my house. Somebody gave me a truck. And I said to God, I'll keep doing this as long as there's a need, and as long as people keep giving. And I thought, maybe I'll do this for a few months, you know, and here I am 30 years later. And that story has just really been that story of people's goodness, you know, of being overwhelmed by it. It's just been repeated over and over.
So how old were you when that first initial thought came to you and your brother to do something?
I was 24, I think, Keith.
Wow.
Yeah, 24. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love what you just said about saying, as long as there's a need and as long as people keep giving, because that's so crucial. Because, you know, Mary's Meals isn't, you're not out there on your own doing this. You know, you've started this, but it's, you know, any good ministry like this is the result of lots of people feeling the call to support and to work in that. And you really can't do it without all of that support. So tell us, like, where your support comes from and how people find their way into, like, how did they know just to bring stuff to this shed and just start packing it up?
Well, I suppose at the beginning there was that natural network of people who'd been to the family retreat centre here. So lots of people in parishes across Scotland began supporting us. But obviously it's gone way beyond that. And I really liked what you said there about this. I think of Mary's Meals as really as a grassroots movement. I think of it as really just a series of lots and lots of little acts of love, like lots of people doing what they can in their own way, no one doing anything spectacular. And you know, when we write down our organizational values, and one of the core ones is our confidence in the innate goodness of people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to God that I've ended up being able to do this with my life, because over and over again, I encounter that goodness in incredible ways. People are good And if you give people an effective way to help the poor, generally they want to do that. And that's what Mary's Meals has become, this effective way to help the poor. The ministry's evolved. But in terms of who supports us, all sorts of people. Lots of people in Iowa, where you are. That's one of our strongholds. Lots of people all over North America, Europe, here in Scotland, where we began, all over the world. I think we had a virtual pilgrimage to Medjugorje last year when we couldn't travel there in person for Mary's Meals, and over 100 countries were represented, that people had joined that pilgrimage online. So that's how spread and how diverse our support base is, and the network grows probably very much through Catholic communities. That's our network. Many people who support us are motivated by their Catholic faith, but not exclusively so. We're never slow to tell people that this is a work that belongs to our Blessed Mother, but we're also genuinely a universal movement. This is for anyone who wants to feed the hungry child. So again, we have a mixture of different faith backgrounds and people of various beliefs involved in this mission, and that's beautiful too.
I love that, because to me, I feel like some people come into the Catholic faith because of theological convictions. Some people come in because of the beauty of the church. They are struck by that. Some people come in because of relationships. But I also feel like there are people who come into the faith because the Lord has motivated them to be the hands and feet of Christ and to serve the Lord in some way. And when they see people who are Catholic that have this passion and have this willingness to sacrifice and to work and to give of themselves in a powerful way, that in and of itself is an evangelistic tool, I believe, to help people see the beauty of our Catholic faith.
I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes we overlook that, Keith, just the sheer beauty of Catholic social teaching that's been built up, but especially that witness that you talk about. Yeah. And I see that so often actually in the young people that support Mary's Meals. And again, that's one of the wonderful things about this mission. So much of it grows through the leadership of young people. And my experience is young people are passionate about justice, about charity, about the concept of ensuring every child in this world might eat every day. And I think it's such a beautiful place to connect with young people, especially here in Europe. I would say in Scotland today, you might describe our society almost sadly as post-Christian. Very few young people would belong to a church. Many of them would never go anywhere near a church. And here's an opportunity to connect something we have in common, that desire to love the poor. And it's such an amazing opportunity to begin to talk to them about why as Christians do we do this? Why do we go the extra mile as Christians? And it also comes with a big responsibility, because sometimes I feel humbled and even a little bit ashamed when I see the charity of non-Christians. Sometimes we're being outdone in this world. We can't be. People need to be looking at us as a church and saying, see how they love one another, and see something different in how we perform our acts of charity. But I'm not sure they always do.
Well, I could definitely agree with you about feeling convicted about that. I mean, and I think you're right when you say that a lot of young people aren't ready to jump into a theological framework, but they say, hey, I want to help people. But those relationships that are formed and that witness is huge. And I love the fact that you have said Mary's Meals is not exclusively Catholic, but at the same time, it's Mary's Meals. It's not a hidden thing. And I think that openness is also invitational to say, hey, we're not going to give you a theological litmus test before you can help us feed the poor, but we are going to show you the beauty of how our Catholic faith motivates us in serving the poor. I mean, I kind of feel like that's something that maybe, and I don't know what it's like in Scotland, but I know in the United States, I feel like a lot of us miss that. We get so caught up in our our own way of doing our faith and the issues that we're dealing with, the things that we don't like about the church, or whether we like to go to this kind of liturgy or that kind of liturgy, or those things. But oftentimes the nuts and bolts of serving the poor and being the hands and feet of Christ, I think that sometimes can take a back seat to other things. And I don't know, how do you help people to make that jump in their own personal faith from being like a nominal Catholic or sort of a lukewarm person in their faith to doing something radical and getting involved in a ministry like what you've done?
Well, I think witness is so important, isn't it? And dialogue, talking about it. I love, you mentioned, how important it is our name. And I just feel, Mary's Meals isn't something I made up. As I said at the beginning, it's a gift given, first of all. And it belongs to our Blessed Mother in a very particular way. Very often, if I'm giving a talk, though, in a secular thing to business people or in a non-denominational school, I might tell the story, first of all, without saying who Mary is, because I know always at the end, someone will put their hand up and say, who's Mary? Is that your mum? Is that your wife?
Yeah.
And I'll say, no, it's Mary, the mother of Jesus. And then you start a dialogue. You say, did you know that she was a refugee one time when they had to flee to Egypt? Do you think that maybe she sometimes maybe faced a struggle to feed her own son, Jesus? And you start this dialogue. I have a similar experience when we're working in impoverished Muslim communities in Africa, and I sit down with the leaders of their community, and the one thing I always find we have in common is Mary, the mother of Jesus. They might call her Miriam. They might have a different belief about who Jesus was. So there's big differences there, but that's our connection. We talk about her because they love her. They love the fact that this work is named after her. So there's so many opportunities there because we can't make people believe something or make people do radical acts of charity. I think the best we can do is really try and live that ourselves. And that's, I don't know, Keith, the older I get, the bigger this sense of gratitude I have in my life for being able to do this, because I didn't do anything to warrant, being allowed to do this with my life. It just happened as a gift. And I feel that's one of the keys to how we think about charity as Catholics. It should be different, is that teaching about charity as a love both received and given. So I think there's a risk sometimes in when we get involved like work like this, we start to identify only as the giver. We're the givers solving the problems for those poor people over there. And it's not like that normally. Whenever I spend time in the very poorest communities in the world, I invariably receive much more back from them. And I'm in need. I need other people to love me too. And first of all, obviously, all of that, before all of it, we are loved by God. So that idea of love not just being a one-way street, us being the giver, but people who need to know God's love first, I think is key, and what enables us to maybe do work of charity in the right way.
That's an incredible point, because I'm thinking of a couple scriptures. The one where we see it's more blessed to give than receive. That in and of itself is kind of a I don't know, it's an interesting statement, because we're more blessed to give, so we've already received in the giving. And I think there's something built into us, Magnus, that knows that, but we still struggle with that, don't we? We know, because whenever I haven't talked to a lot of people who have done radical acts of giving and charity and really laid their life down that have regretted it. I haven't met too many people like that. But yet at the same time, and I think we know that intellectually, but because it's so counterintuitive, I still feel like many of us hold back. Many of us sort of protect some part of ourselves from being open to the radical things that God wants to do in us, because we're afraid that we're not going to have our needs met, or that we're going to be someone who isn't taken care of. But what I see with what you're doing is there was a moment in your life, and I'm sure continuous moments, where you had to really just lay it on the line and say, I'm trusting God with my life. and I'm trusting him that if I give up, you left your job, you've basically devoted your entire life's work to this. Have there been moments where you've had to really sort of lean on God and say, okay, I'm stepping out in faith here? How do you get people to that point and explain to them that it's going to be okay if they're willing to really give of themselves?
Yeah, it's an ongoing journey for all of us, and I have had a lot of experiences, and I'll maybe tell you a story about that. But first of all, just to your point about that, what we receive when we give, that again is one of my experiences over and over again in life. I've noticed that the people who give the most, I don't mean, give the most dollars or pounds necessarily, but give of themselves the most, are the happiest people I've ever met. I remember this woman way back at the beginning of this work, who I used to visit once a month with my van, and she would give me all these collections of food and clothing. She was a widow, living on her own in this cottage, and we would always sit down afterwards and have lunch together. She would give me a lovely bowl of homemade soup. And on this occasion, when she gave me the soup, she poured out the soup with a mug rather than a ladle. And I started looking round her kitchen, and I noticed all the cupboards were bare. Everything had gone. And I said to her, Mrs. Duncan-Jones, are you moving home? And she said, no, I'm happy here. I said, what happened to all your things? She said, well, I was thinking about those poor people in Bosnia, and I was thinking, what does an old lady like me need with all those extra pots and pans and plates? And unbeknownst to me, she was systematically giving away everything in her home. But she comes to mind now when you mention that, because the thing I remember most about Mrs. Duncan-Jones was her joy. I remember just driving away from her home that day and looking in my rear view mirror, and this woman with this glowing, with this beaming smile, she'd given away everything, and she was as happy a person as I've met. And I see that. And then to your point about maybe own experiences about relying on God, he's definitely over the years shown us in a very specific way that he will never let us down. One occasion on those days, driving back to Bosnia, I won't tell you the whole story because it's a long one, but basically we unexpectedly had to spend all the money that we had in our bank account, our charity bank account at that point, to help some people in a very particular situation. And I was driving home from Bosnia back to Scotland, and I started to get really worried. I was thinking about the bills we had to pay. And I remember the amount exactly. It was £4,200 that we'd had to spend in this unplanned way. And as I got home, I was really saying to God, please, you need to help us. We have the bills to pay. We have all these aid donations coming in that we need to transport to Bosnia. And when I arrived home, my wife, Julie, said, Magnus, there's a letter here. You better read it. And I got even more concerned at this stage. And I opened the letter, and in it was a cheque for £4,200.
I love it.
From a priest. It was from a priest in Ireland who said, I don't want a thank you letter. I want to remain completely anonymous. No one knew about that figure, £4,200, apart from myself and my wife. No one else knew it.
Wow.
And that day I just felt very much, Keith, it wasn't just that God was providing for us. He wanted us to know that he was providing for us. And I never forget that when things get sticky, when we're wondering, can we add some more children to the Mary's Meals program? Will the funding come? And God has never let us down, ever, all these years doing this work, never.
Praise the Lord. I think there's a huge lesson in that for people who are feeling the call into that kind of radical lifestyle change, because I think there's a difference between being a person who just sort of says, all right, I want to make sure I give a little bit here and there, and it's just sort of a part of what they normally do, versus someone who says, God, I'm all in for you, and I'm going to devote my life to service. It's kind of like I see the joy, like you mentioned, the people who give the most are the most joyful. I find that people in their faith who who make no limits to what they will give for the Lord or to the Lord of themselves, they have the most radical faith journeys of anybody I've ever seen.
I agree, and you used that word adventure at the beginning. I love that, because that's what it's like. I mean, I've read about your story too, Keith, and we have an adventure, don't we, when we step
We
out in the
do.
Lord, and it never quite ends. You never just do it like I'm sorted now, I'm a charitable person, or I'm now a Catholic, or I'm now. It never ends. You take one step, and then God's got something else for you, and I think that's. I think that's key as well. And when we think about how to become people of charity, people who give of ourselves, I think we probably should be careful if ever it starts to feel comfortable, or that we've got it all nailed now, because there's always something else, isn't there? There's always another step to take, and it's normally not one we planned far out. It's very often an unexpected thing.
Well, I love how the way the Lord led you to this. You made a comment earlier when you said this wasn't something that you would have ever dreamed up for yourself. You didn't sit down and say, "How can I start a feeding ministry with?" I doubt there were whiteboards with newsprint on them and computerized flow charts and all of the goals and all that. You probably just said, "My goal is to do what the Lord wants and to be obedient every step of the way." And then let the Lord do things. And look at what he's done. I mean, tell us a little bit about kind of how the journey of Mary's Meals grew from where it started to 2 million kids. I mean, I went to a presentation last week where I got to see a little bit of that, but help us to understand sort of the infrastructure of how this works and what it looks like to feed 2 million kids every day.
Yeah, so it's been an amazing journey. Those early years, always all about driving aid back and forth, and then we got involved working in other countries, doing different kinds of things, opening homes for street children in Latin America and in Romania, and running health projects in Africa. Whole range of things, no real focus. And we did all that initial work under the name Scottish International Relief. And then in 2002, this work of Mary's Meals was born. That year, we were involved in emergency feeding programs in Africa, in Malawi. And while we were doing that, really just bringing food into villages where people were literally starving, I had this encounter with a family. A local parish priest took me to meet them when he was visiting the sick in his parish, and he explained to me before we went in to this family home that the father had just died and the mother was now dying also. And she was called Emma, and she was lying on her bare floor when we went in, and she was surrounded by her 6 children. And Emma said to us, there's nothing left for me now except to pray that somebody will look after my children when I'm gone. And then I began talking to her oldest child sitting beside her. He was called Edward. He was 14 years of age. And at one point in the conversation, I asked Edward, what are your hopes? What are your dreams? He said to me, I'd like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was the extent of his dream at 14 years of age.
Wow.
And that answer really made me think about that. The fact that there are millions of children in the world today who don't go to school because they're hungry, because they're begging or working or doing whatever they need to do to survive, and therefore missing out on that education that can set them free. So I love the fact that really this new mission of Mary's Meals that was then born was launched by the words of a child. And that mission became simply providing one good meal every day for children like Edward in school. The meal was always in school. So we meet that immediate need of the hungry child for a meal, but at the same time, we're tackling the underlying cause of poverty by bringing them into the classroom where they can get that ladder out of poverty. So just began very simply, one school in Malawi. And from the beginning, we said to the local community, look, we've got this idea to start serving meals, but we'll only do it if you believe in it and if you're willing to volunteer and organize locally. And immediately they said yes. And we began one school using local food, which is another key principle of ours. And immediately, Keith, we could see it wasn't just a nice idea. This was going to work because immediately children who'd never been to school before ever came because of that promise of a meal. Children who used to come to school just some days began coming every day because of the promise of a meal. After a bit longer, we could see this huge improvement in academic performance. Kids who couldn't concentrate in class because of hunger now could. And then the next school came to us and said, can we have Mary's meals? We said yes. So it went on and on. So as you say, today in the world, feeding over 2 million children in 20 different countries. In Malawi alone, where we began, we feed 1 million children every day. It's a third of the primary school population in that nation. And to give you an idea, in Malawi alone, there are over 85,000 Malawian volunteers. Most of them live in great poverty themselves. And this is their act of charity. Their giving is to get up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, to go to the school, to light the fire, to cook these enormous pots of porridge for the meals that we serve there. So it's a simple model, happening in lots of different kinds of environments, different cultures, but always that same simple thing we do, and it works.
So you're feeding these kids primarily in school, using local volunteers and locally sourced food. So you're not sending in truckloads of things from the United States and the local economies are going, oh man, how are we going to survive now? We can't, I mean, I've been a part of some different international missions things, and I know how that can sometimes, in an attempt to do good things for people, it can sort of sometimes rob local communities from their opportunities when the Americans or the Europeans show up with all this other stuff. And it's, I've spent some time in Haiti doing work down there, and I remember they were saying to us, don't send us clothes. We don't need more clothes from America. We need people to help us do what we're doing here. In order to make our local community, because the goal isn't just to just feed kids. It's to help their communities be revitalized, and like you said, address the core issues, which education and schooling.
Exactly, spot on. You explained that very well, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. But you can't go past the immediate need either, and that's the beauty of Mary's Meals, because it is both at once in this simple act. You do, when a child's hungry today, we have to feed them first of all, but yeah, we also need, if we really love the person in need in front of us, we want to set them free, don't we? We don't want them to be dependent on our charity forever. So that's a really important aspect of this work as well, and that's exactly why for us, it has to be. First of all, it has to be locally owned. We are doing our part from outside and raising the funds to buy the food. But we don't want to become an organization that's wading in to different places around the world and saying, we are here to solve all your problems. It's not that. We're just walking alongside those good people in Malawi. We're providing what they don't currently have. And then they're giving what they do have. And that makes it very beautiful. And absolutely, it's about, in the long term, helping them get to a situation where they don't depend on other people's aid. And I would say one of the most beautiful things about Mary's Meals at this stage, as I get older, is to go back to some of those communities and to meet all these young people who once ate Mary's Meals in school. We like to call them Generation Hope. One of our documentaries is actually called that. And you meet these young people who've become the leaders in their communities, and they'll say to you, without Mary's Meals, I would never have stepped inside a classroom. Without Mary's Meals, I might not be alive today. And there they are. They are the agents of change in their community. There's a young lady in Malawi that we're very proud of. She's called Veronica. And we were filming with her while we were making that documentary, Generation Hope, a few years ago. And it was only during filming, when we were talking to Veronica, we understood that she was part of that group of 200 children that we very first fed in 2002. She was an orphan who was raised by her older sisters. She describes how sometimes they went for as long as a week without eating a proper meal
Hmm.
at home. She never would have gone to school. They were just all about survival. And then Mary's Meals came for the first time, and she went to school. Not that long ago, a couple of years ago, Veronica graduated from university in Malawi. She's now teaching in college, and so you just see in that one life of that young lady, and she's an amazing young lady, articulate, confident, how things can change through what's something that might feel very small to us.
Yeah.
The ramifications of it go on. And I think that's something else to think about with our little acts of love, our acts of charity. Most of it, I don't think we'll see in this life. I think that might be one of the blessings in heaven, that maybe we'll get, maybe we'll understand more the ramifications that go on across oceans and down through generations too. I think when we decide to do something good, it changes things.
That's a huge point to make. Oftentimes, because we live in such a society where we want instant gratification, we want to go on a 7 to 10 day mission trip and feel like we've done our part, we've changed the world or whatever. Many of the things that we do, or even I would say give, we don't know what the ultimate ramifications are of that. But here's the thing I think is beautiful, is it doesn't matter. We don't have to know. And when you can truly trust the Lord with yourself and say, God, I give this to you. It's kind of like a Marian consecration, where you consecrate yourself to the Blessed Virgin Mary and you give to her the right to do with your prayers and your intentions whatever she wants, and she doesn't have to check with you first to make sure it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think there can be I was thinking about that, I think any really authentic work of charity or act of charity, when we give to a charitable organization, or we stop to help the homeless person on the street, or whatever it might be, I think if it's an authentic act of charity, there'll always be an element of risk to that.
Sure.
Like, we don't really know if that organization is going to do the right thing, or we don't know if that project's going to work out and have the end result that we hope for, or we don't know if that homeless person that we've never met before might misuse what we gave them or not use it the way we intended them to, whatever. But I think, to your point, I think there also has to be, within reason, we need to be responsible about it, but I think there does have to be a point in your choice to give, to say, well, I can't control all of that, but I can control whether I choose to be charitable. And at that stage, you have to let go of that and trust.
Yeah. That's plaque material right there, Magnus. I don't have to control what happens if I'm being charitable. I just have to control myself in order to be charitable. Like but I think that's our problem, is we want to control everything. And part of our faith journey is learning to let go of that control so that God can have that control. Our fear is that if we don't control something, it's going to be out of control. But there's a difference between something being out of our control and out of God's control. And I love the idea that you started this ministry because God gave you one little idea. He didn't give you the whole plan. How do you help people get from that place, Magnus, where they have just this little bit of a seed where they feel like maybe God would want more from me in my life in terms of a radical act of service or generosity, from actually just beginning that little seed? How do you help people grow that into something greater where they're able to do the types of things like what you guys have done?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we're not all called to start something that grows and grows. As you've said and I've said, I didn't intend this. I thank God it has. I think most of our acts of charity are probably things that won't lead to some big new global mission. And if I'm really honest, Keith, the most impressive people I know, or the most incredible charitable things I see happening, are actually very humble things, things that might not achieve some spectacular goal to hold up in people. And sometimes I feel a little bit embarrassed, if I'm honest. I love talking about Mary's Meals. Don't get me wrong. You've probably figured that out by now, because it's this beautiful thing God's doing. It's not mine. However, I do worry a little bit sometimes that people think, to be really good or to be really charitable, we need to do something spectacular or something that receives lots of plaudits and acclaim. It's clearly not that, is it? And you just, in our own communities, in our own families, we see people doing good, very good, selfless things every day, for which they'll never be thanked for which people won't pay much attention to. So I think that's really important too. However, God does sometimes take small things that we try and do and turn them into something unexpected. But I suppose, I don't think I'm very good at giving advice about this, but I suppose it is just about starting, about taking the first step, because I think there's different reasons why people hesitate. There's that thing we just talked about maybe letting go and taking a little risk almost. I think sometimes also I encounter that sometimes people don't think they're worthy, that people think they're not good enough to do something good, and in one sense, we're all in that boat, aren't we? We're all sinners, we're all broken, we're all a mess, and we can make the mistake of thinking, well, I need to get sorted first, or I need to be qualified in some way. I am absolutely not qualified to do this job I'm doing. That's for sure. Every day I'm painfully aware of that. I think maybe God asked me to do this partly for that reason, because it's very clear to anyone who knows me that humanly I'm not the right person to do this, and therefore it's more clear that it's God's work. So we can make the mistake of thinking we need to be better or we need to be qualified and then we'll do something good. I think maybe we can turn it around the other way. Even if you don't think you're very good, just do something good. And I think sometimes when we do that, we start to learn something about ourselves that we didn't realize before. That there is something beautiful in us, that God did make us for a reason, and that God does have a plan for every single one of us. Every single one of us, he made us to do good things. That's his plan for us. So just take that first step.
Wow, I just typed that out because I'm gonna use that later. I'll credit you of that, but I love that quote. Even if you don't think you are good, do something good. That's huge, because you're right. So many people, they look at someone like you, and I don't want to embarrass you further, but I'm going to for a second. We look at someone like you, Magnus, who the Lord has used to do something amazing, and we instantly think that must mean you're some kind of perfect guy who has this, you have coffee with Jesus every day, and the Virgin Mary walks with you as you go to get your mail. And we look at ourselves and we go, I'm just a regular person who goes to work every day and takes care of my family and wants to do something good, but who am I to be a part of anything that God is doing? And sometimes that can turn into a sort of self-loathing to where we feel like, well, I'm just not going to do anything because I'm not worthy. But when we make that decision, even no matter how we feel about ourselves, to do something good, then it's like God just cuts through that garbage that we tell ourselves and says, no, it's not about who you are. It's about being available to me. One of my best friends, he's a pastor, he often says this quote all the time that has never left me. He says, God isn't looking for people to do things for him. He's looking for people he can do things through. And to me, I think that's such a huge part of not just like our own personal, practicing of our faith, but also how God might use us in the world to help other people. If we recognize this is the work, this isn't my idea or your idea, this is God's idea, and he just needs someone who he can work through.
Yeah, I love that. I think I really love that. Absolutely. Yeah, and thank goodness, that we don't all have to be perfect before we can do something, or we'd all be waiting forever.
Amen. Hey, I just have a couple more questions for you, Magnus. And these are like, I want to know a little bit more about like your personal faith journey from the standpoint of who are some of the people that have inspired you in your faith, and what are some of the things that maybe you've read or your favorite devotions that have helped you sustain yourself throughout your life and in this work?
Yeah. I mean, at a personal level, I mentioned my parents. They're still alive. They're in their late 80s, and they are. When I think back now, and some of the choices they made, not just to turn their house into a retreat center, they fostered children who were in difficulty when we were older, and just they are, without realizing at the time, they taught me so much. And then so many of the great. I love reading the stories of the saints. I always have. I love Saint Francis. I love Mother Teresa. Obviously she has so much to say of relevance to this mission of Mary's Meals. So I feel a very strong devotion to her. Personally, in terms of my own faith life, before I'm a charity founder CEO, I'm just a dad and a husband. We've got 7 kids. And we try to say the rosary together every day, and for me it's doing those very simple things. I think I have a simple kind of devotional prayer life. I don't think you have to be in this category or that category. I love saying the rosary. I love going to what might be described as a charismatic prayer group. I love just praising God. I love walking up the hill behind our house every day and saying my prayers up there. We built our own Stations of the Cross up the hill. So trying to get a routine, and I'm not very good at that. I fail often, Keith. But I think as we do these other good works in our lives, I don't think we can come back often enough to remembering it's rooted in faithful prayer, even at the times when we just feel empty and dry and feel like nothing's happening. Just that discipline of we do it. We're there present with the Lord every day anyway. And not forgetting that our first vocation is, if we're married, is as husbands. If we're parents, is as parents. That's our first call. If we don't get that right, there's no point in us running about thinking about other things.
Wow. Well, that's so inspiring. I would love to be able to share with our listeners and viewers out there how they can get involved in supporting this incredible work and how they can find out more about it. So where can people go? What should they do if they want to join you guys?
Yeah, no, please do join us. And probably the easiest thing to do is just go to our website, which is marysmealsusa.org. You'll find lots of information there. You'll see some great films about our work, and you'll see different ways that you might be able to get involved or support this mission. And we would love that, because it's amazing. We're feeding 2 million kids today, but that work's only just begun. There are over 70 million kids in the world today who desperately need Mary's Meals. So please God, this work's just begun, but we need people to join us to reach those kids that are still waiting.
Amen. Well, there'll be a link in the description below so people can get involved. And I want to thank you for not just the amazing work that you're doing, but for taking time to join me here on Catholic Feedback. And I'm looking forward to getting to meet with you in person at the Christ Our Life conference in September. That's going to be awesome.
That's going to be great, Keith. Yeah, I only just learned that you're also going to be there speaking too. So I've been going to that for a number of years. I love it. I love the people of Iowa. So let's make sure we get some time, Keith, when we're not on the stage to get to know each other a bit. That would be great.
I would love that. Well, I'm very inspired by you, Magnus, and by the work that you do. And I just want to thank you for your witness. I want to thank you for your example and the work that you do every day, because we need to see more of that in the world. There's too much in the Catholic Church right now. There's too much bickering and fighting, or there's too much nominalism and apathy. And I think we all can agree that we need to be the hands and feet in Christ, and we need to feed people. I mean, everyone understands that. So to me, to be able to just cut through some of that stuff that we always get so worked up about, and to be able to say, look, we have to be, if we don't have this down, then we're missing something. We're missing something. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much once again for joining me here. And friends, on Catholic Feedback, make sure that you take a look at that website. And if the Lord's calling you to get involved in Mary's Meals, just do it. Get involved. Become a donor. Become a volunteer. Whatever it is that the Lord would lead you to do. But seek God for whatever else He's got in your life. Because, friends, He's got plans for you if we would just be willing to let go of that control and see what God can do. Amazing things can happen. And I think that you've seen that with Magnus. So once again, Magnus, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, and I look forward to see you in September, my friend.
I look forward to that too. Keith, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that too. Thank you.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Send in your questions and comments to feedback@catholicfeedback.com. This podcast is brought to you by Stewardship, a mission of faith, and is also supported by our team at patreon.com/Keith Nestor. Please consider joining our support team. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information about Down to Earth or to bring me to your parish or event, visit down2earthministry.org. See you next time.